Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Parker Pod. On today's episode, I'm joined by a longtime friend of mine, Phil Petrina. Phil and I grew up playing football together, and he's now a lawyer at McNees, Wallace Nurick, where he focuses on one of the hottest topics in college sports today, name, image, and likeness deals, or NIL deals. Phil works directly in this evolving space, helping athletes, schools, and businesses navigate the legal side of NIL agreements. In this episode, we're going to break down what NIL deals really mean for college athletes, some of the big opportunities and risks that they face, and how the climate around collegiate athletics is changing in real time. Whether you're an athlete, a parent, or just a sports fan, this conversation will give you a front row look at one of the biggest shifts in college sports history. Just a disclaimer, the following conversation is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute any legal advice. The views and opinions expressed by Phil Petrina are his own and do not necessarily reflect those of McNees, Wallace, and Nurick or any of its clients. Nothing discussed in this episode should be relied upon as a substitute for consulting with a qualified attorney about your specific situation. Neither this podcast nor Phil, nor McNees, Wallace, and Nurick assume any liability for actions taken based on the content of this discussion. How are you doing today, Phil?
Hey, Joe. What's up, man? I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome. I really appreciate you coming back on the podcast. Last time we had a pretty solid discussion on NIL deals, specifically the fact that they were just coming out when you and I did our last podcast. What are some things about NIL deals that people who aren't necessarily aware about the specifics of them should know?
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, it's a great question, Joe. Again, thanks for having me back. Had a blast the last time. Always a pleasure to come back and join the Parker podcast. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely.
You're right. A lot has changed since the last time we talked. They were, NIL was still a relatively new, hot button issue when we talked the last time. And, I think the absence of clear regulation and guidelines has really reared its head over the last year and a half or so, the last year. And so what we've seen is the NCAA policies on NIL, while there have been some slight tweaks to them, the guidance hasn't really changed. So the structure of the deals and the nature of what is technically allowed and isn't allowed, at least under the policy itself, has remained basically the same. What we've seen, though, is shifts in the NIL space through litigation. So there were a series of legal cases of lawsuits brought against the NCAA under the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. And so, for your viewers and for you, who may not know what antitrust is, but antitrust, U.S. antitrust law through the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 is a statute that was enacted, in 1890 in support of our free capitalist market, and it regulates anti-competitive behavior and prohibits monopolistic behavior in the U.S. marketplace. And so it's a statute that regulates the free and fair trade of interstate commerce in our country. And so that has been the avenue by which college athletes, their attorneys, and other interested stakeholders, even states' attorney generals. There were 2 lawsuits brought by attorney generals in Tennessee and Missouri recently against the NCAA. And what those all culminated into was this overarching, encompassing case that became known as House versus NCAA. And it was a class action lawsuit brought by NCAA athletes, challenging the authority of the NCAA to enforce its amateurism policies against athletes. So, and challenging that case specifically, House v. NCAA challenge whether or not student athletes can and should be compensated directly by the universities that they attend. And so what they were challenging was that there's an unfair restraint in trade by the NCAA, banning direct compensation to athletes.
Yeah.
Whereas if they were in another market or doing anything else, they weren't student athletes, they would be able to be compensated for those activities. The House v. NCAA case ultimately ended up in a lawsuit settlement that settled, I believe the initial settlement was in October of 2024. It was approved, or it was the initial settlement draft was accepted by the court. And then it took months and months of negotiating what the terms of that settlement would look like before we ultimately arrived at an approved settlement that went into effect July 1, 2025. So just last month, this thing went into effect. And, how it changed the landscape and again, kind of, unsettled what the NIL landscape looked like over the last year was that for the first time now, colleges are permitted to directly compensate athletes through a revenue sharing agreement. The settlement provided for a trust of up to $20.5 million a year for universities' athletics departments. To buy into and to fund up to $20.5 million in direct revenue sharing payments from colleges and universities directly to student athletes. So that was the one aspect of the settlement. The other aspect of the settlement was I believe it was $9 billion in back pay damages that were ordered to be paid to former NCAA student athletes who missed out on the opportunity to capitalize on their name, image, and likeness, dating all the way back to 2016 through the present. And so those payments will go out to athletes that go in and claim it under the settlement class of the lawsuit. And back pay damages have been ordered, to compensate those athletes. So the biggest change here has been where we were going. NIL, was initially contemplated in 2021 to be, strictly independent of colleges and universities, and they were supposed to be all outside of the athletics departments through third-party endorsement deals.
Yeah, that's what I heard. That was my understanding of it. I didn't even know that they were considering the direct revenue sharing at all.
So now schools are able to do a direct revenue share, and that's kind of a legal term of art that they're using right now. And the reason that word is being used as opposed to salary. Call it whatever you want, but the more that this starts to look like you're paying these athletes, which is what they're doing, there's a real question about what their employment status is.
Yeah,
are these guys? Are they employees of the school?
Yeah, you do need to offer them certain benefits because I know that there's certain 401ks. If you offer someone a 401k and they work for the school, you have to offer everyone that works at the school a 401k. You can't just offer certain people 401ks. So do they get a 401k? Do they get the 401k match? Do they get all the benefits that the employees get? Stuff like that.
Well, that's That's the question that remains to be answered. I think we're going to get an answer to that ultimately through another lawsuit, which is how this has sort of played out. It's the NCAA hasn't really been adopting new policies. The model has been shifting through the courts. Um, so we will either see that play out in court, that employment law question. Are they employees? Are they entitled to receive those benefits and those fringe benefits that you just mentioned?
Yeah.
Under current NCAA policies, like health care is offered through the school's health insurers to student athletes, and so they can already sign up for that benefit. Um, so that is something, the 401k and 401k matches and bonuses, you raise a really, really good point. Do they qualify for those other fringe benefits that other, tenured professors and employees of the school get? We don't know. So it's either going to be litigated in the courts, or you're going to see some kind of congressional federal action. And also in recent months, because of how this system is shaking out and the unsettled nature of it, and the transfer portal becoming a much bigger concern now, where when you have schools that are able to directly compensate an athlete, you have, in Alabama or Tennessee or, Ohio State, Penn State, able to go into the transfer portal and say, hey, or even there's tampering that goes on. So say the athlete doesn't even enter into the transfer portal. There are schools that will sort of backdoor contact athletes and say, if you hop in the portal, we have $2 million set aside for you to come to our school and play here. And then the kid hits the transfer portal and transfers. So it's become an unregulated free agency for college sports. And so when you have that uncertainty and, you're talking seven figures, dollar
Yeah.
values in contracts that are hanging in the balance, there are a lot of people in Congress and at the White House that think something needs to be done to provide some clarity on this before it gets out of hand. So just last month, at the end of July, President Trump signed an executive order essentially ordering the U.S. Attorney General, the Secretary of Education, the chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, and the Secretary of Health and Human Services to evaluate the NCAA policies and start enforcing. He essentially ordered those groups of people to put together an enforcement guideline and what that might look like to try to clamp down on that interstate issue of athletes just being pulled in a million different directions. And the stakes are really high. So I think that the White House sees that as an issue. A lot of, Congress members also see this as an issue with sort of bipartisan support. It's not really, a Republican versus Democrat issue. I think that there are a lot of eyes on this, and because of the interstate nature of it, we may eventually see an overarching federal bill on college sports. But that remains to be, seen. We'll see.
Yeah. And I think one of my main questions too was, you said that the $9 billion in back pay was from 2016. Why 2016? Like, is there a specific date, or was there a statute of limitations where they were like, we can only go back this far when we're talking about who's owed back pay? Because, like, if not, we would pay every college athlete NIL money.
Yeah. It's a great question. A lot of people are asking that same question, including myself. And there are some questions, there are some potentially outstanding legal questions about the enforceability of this settlement agreement because you have a date in 2016 that was sort of arbitrarily determined.
Yeah, because like that, like you may mess with some people's bank accounts just by going, yep, this day in 2016, if you were in college after that, you make money. Someone's like, I graduated the week before and
Right.
I played
Yeah.
football. Yeah.
Right. So the NCAA attorneys and the judge in this case in the Northern District of California determined that there has to be a cutoff date. We can't sort of run this back in perpetuity. And the attorneys representing the class, the settlement class of student athletes came to an agreement
Mm.
that that date should be set in 2016 forward. There were challenges to that. I think Terrell Pryor was one of the people that tried to challenge that because he was, I think, back in he was at Ohio State back in I think 2009. He lost that challenge, and I think without being terribly familiar with his case and how that sort of went down, I think that it was determined, right, that there has to be, they can't go back in perpetuity. There has to be a certain date and time from where NIL really started to tick up through the present, and they determined that 2016 was probably that time frame. But look, it is arbitrary, and people like Terrell Pryor and others are probably not wrong in challenging that date set.
Yeah, because I mean, you're not going to lose anything by being like, hey, I feel like I deserve some profit sharing.
Right. Yep.
I feel like too, with the NIL portion of it specifically too, not necessarily the profit revenue sharing. 2016, between like 2012 and 2016, like social media blew up and endorsement deals started to have a lot more money come through because people were posting on social media. A lot of college athletes were getting a lot of followers, and it was a very like, it kind of sucked for them because if they had a million followers or 500,000 followers, they couldn't get any money from any kind of endorsement deal. So I do feel like that the back pay on that kind of makes a little bit of sense because that's when they really started to have the opportunity for those online endorsements, and they really missed out.
Certainly. Yeah. I think that was part of the calculus in determining the date. But, you raise another good point. Guys like Johnny Manziel are, they're, he's, sacking his sorrows. Johnny Manziel, I think, was on a podcast recently. He said, if we had this when I was in college, I'd have made $1 billion. And while $1 billion seems a little bit like a stretch, Johnny Manziel is probably the prime example of what NIL could have done for someone.
Yes.
Like that. That guy would have made an obscene amount of money when he was at Texas A&M, and he didn't have that opportunity. And I believe he was also prior to that 2016 cutoff date.
Was
so he? I
Yeah,
can't remember
was
when
it?
he graduated. I think he was just before that cutoff date.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. But he's not wrong. Guys like Manziel, man, to the extent he wasn't sort of being paid something under the table,
Yeah.
he would have made a lot more money than what he did.
Yeah.
And the point is well noted. He's also another prime example, though, of what what some of the cautions with NIL should be. Take Johnny Manziel back to college, give him the six. He probably would have been in like a $6 million a year range guy, and then on top of that, third party endorsements. I mean, he could. I can easily foresee a scenario where a guy like Johnny Manziel in college at 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, making probably $10 million a year
Yeah.
in revenue sharing and in third-party endorsements because he was the name and face of college football, and in many respects still is. How money like that can really impact a young man or a young woman in other cases. If Johnny Manziel had access to resources like that, I think there's some questions about whether or not he would still be alive.
Yeah.
Some of these guys cannot handle things like that. I think Johnny Manziel would tell you that. Like, he was the party guy.
Oh, yeah,
He
dude.
was out all week, before games. Like, give that guy access to money and resources like that, and who knows what would happen. And
Yeah.
I think he's sort of now using his platform in a positive way to educate young athletes on how to do things the right way. And while you have this level of fame and notoriety, to not do some of the things that he did, and how that can extend the longevity of your career and set you up for future success. So I think he's now using his platform in a very positive way to educate people on on what not to do, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's an aspect of NIL that we really need to be mindful of with these young guys and giving them money like that.
Absolutely. So when they sign like the profit sharing or the NIL deal, they get that money directly. There's no escrow. There's no held by the university. There's no nothing like that. It's just right into their bank account.
Nope. Yeah, it goes right in. And before the July 1 settlement date, there was some craziness going on with third-party NIL collectives and school revenue sharing agreements, where post July 1, 2025, any third-party NIL deal is subject to this additional scrutiny. So part of the House settlement was setting up what's called the College Sports Commission, and they're a third-party overseer of any third-party NIL deal that is greater than $600 in value.
So all of them.
So all of them, anything that's not paid from the university, anything that comes from a third party is subject to a third party review that's run by Deloitte. They set up a website and app platform called NIL Go, and within 7 days of signing it, or 7 days before you execute an agreement, you have to disclose. The athlete has the responsibility to disclose the contract to NIL Go, to the College Sports Commission. They review the agreement to ensure that it's legally enforceable and binding, that there's clear deliverables, and they undergo this sort of arbitrary fair market value analysis of, is the money you're being paid your fair market value for the services being performed? There's some legal arguments there about what does fair market value mean, and if a sponsor is willing to pay a guy X number of dollars to do a service, that is the fair market value. So
yeah, and can they deny it? Like if they're like, oh, they're
they have
paying
to,
you,
yes.
yeah, they're gonna give you 500,000. We think you're worth $1 million. Say no, you can't do it. Like, is that part of the process?
It's usually in the opposite direction. It's this third party collective is paying you $1 million. We think that that's too much. Your social media posts aren't worth $1 million, or they're not worth 500,000. We're going to deny that as excessive and in excess of what your fair market value is for those services. And they denied a few of them, and then a subsequent lawsuit was filed, and the NCAA and its College Sports Commission were slapped down on enforcing that. They had to come to another settlement agreement to say that, okay, we won't slap those down, at least for now.
Yeah. Because it's one thing to give, like, it's one thing to be like, hey, they offered you 500,000, but like for what you're doing, you could be giving them 2 million. Do what you want, but this is like fair market value, like what we think what you're doing is worth, but make your own decision. that would actually be helpful to the athlete. In no way, I mean, what's their main concern with someone getting paid, quote unquote, more than their worth?
Yeah, I think the concern is that, and it is somewhat of a legitimate one, where they're trying to remove, the appearance that this is a pay to play arrangement. The third party collective is paying someone an excessive amount of money just to come and play football or basketball. Um, the NCAA is trying to remove the appearance of pay to play, and that's what the concern is with these massive third party deals through NIL collectives. Is the pay to play and the tampering that goes on with that. So a third party NIL collective, board president contacting, a student at another university and saying, "Hey, our collective has 500K for you if you hit the transfer portal." They're trying that it's an effort to try to clamp down on that, I think, and also ensuring that the students are performing a service for the money that they're being given, as opposed to, we're paying you $500,000 to come play football. And in this legal agreement, it's going to say, oh, like, you have to show up and sign autographs one time at our NIL collective fundraiser that we're going to have. Is that justifiable in saying, okay, a guy comes one time to sign autographs? Is that really worth 500 grand? Or are they just, they're using that as a formality and paying a guy to come play football here, or basketball or whatever? So that's, the intent of it is that the enforceability of it is very questionable, though, because it sets this arbitrary guideline of, well, if a sponsor is willing to pay that, then that is the student athlete's fair market value. So how does the NCAA enforce that without getting sued? And so pre-July 1, to circle back to your original question about if these are lump sums, before July 1, NIL collectives front-loaded all of their payments for this year in one lump sum on June 30th to their student athletes, before that level of scrutiny was required on their agreements. So you have NCAA rosters. I think I saw, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think I saw one of the Big Ten schools has a roster that's pushing like $40 to $45 million this year.
Really?
20 and a half through revenue sharing, and then an additional 20 and a half of front loaded third party collective deals. That they pushed in on June 30th, in lump sum disbursements to these athletes before the additional scrutiny comes. The next question is, every dollar amount that you pay in a direct revenue sharing agreement from university to an athlete is subject to that $20.5 million cap, the revenue sharing cap. So it's essentially a salary cap like they have in the NBA and in the NFL. The question has now become, do third party NIL collective payments count towards the $20.5 million cap? Under the original terms of the House settlement agreement, they didn't count. I think that the revised settlement agreement is now saying that they do count, or are going to count in the future. And that was also part of this executive order that President Trump signed in trying to put some guardrails on the third party NIL payments, that either those types of payments are, there's some language in this executive order that sort of implicate whether or not those are going to be legal moving forward and they'll cease to exist, or if they will be legal, will they be counted towards the $20.5 million revenue sharing cap? My sense is that the third party deals are going to be subject to a higher level of scrutiny for the reasons that we just talked about.
Yeah.
They have to get the transfer portal situation under control in one way or another, and so that's what this is all about. I think true third party, corporate sponsor wants to do a social media marketing deal with student athlete. Those are always going to be lawful and legal.
Yeah.
It's these collective deals that I think are going to be subject to some serious scrutiny moving forward.
Yeah, I think two things. One, with the third-party collectives and the profit sharing, or the revenue sharing, not profit sharing. I do think that if they end up combining them for whatever reason, that it should be a higher level than the 20.5.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, for the second point is for the transfer portal, I feel like depending on the sport, say you're a starter on a football team, you make X amount, right? And I know that's like, well, what if you get a star player? What if they're getting paid and it's not the NFL just quite yet, right? This is my own opinion on this. If you're a starter, let's say you get $250,000 a year, right? Or $200,000 a year, whatever it may be. I think that's going to limit the poaching. Right? Like we have 500,000 for you or $1 million for you. Maybe not eliminate it because you could still do a third party collective, but with the revenue sharing aspect of it, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Yeah.
I do feel like
I
that
think
would at least be, yeah.
Your finger is on your finger is on the pulse of the issue. Excuse me. There are a lot of people sort of raising that same question. I think it goes back to our earlier discussion about what happens with the employment status of athletes. One of the main complaints about this House versus NCAA settlement is that it was signed by attorneys representing a class of student athletes. But the $20.5 million, one could argue, is arbitrary, and it was, they're capping that amount without any sort of collective bargaining agreement with the NCAA student athletes. So, I think the next phase of this process is all leading towards a more formal process, just like the NFL has, where there is a players' union that is represented by, a board of directors, and they represent the athletes' interests, and a collective bargaining agreement will probably at some point be signed with the NCAA and, whatever players association to set those numbers on a negotiated basis, just like the NFL does. That will formalize the process. And through that, you'll see more formalized numbers. Like you just said, you go to the NFL, there are strict salary caps that teams, find ways to navigate in between the salary cap. There are minimum contract values, rookie contract maximum values. There are all kinds of numbers in the collective bargaining agreements with the NFL and the NBA that sort of dictate those numbers. So I think that's probably where this is headed. But as soon as you have like a collectively bargained agreement between NCAA athletes and the NCAA, and this is what they're trying to avoid, that would shift the model from them being just students to being employees of the university, and that changes a lot of different things for them. So I don't know. It's interesting, but it does seem like that's where it's headed. And I think that that could lead to more stability in, in the market. I don't know if there's a way around that right now.
Yeah, because it seems like a lot of big names are getting the NIL deals, the endorsements, and I assume for the most part, by big names, I mean like big social media influence. Um, and for the most part, if they can just give them any amount of money, I'm assuming that
Yep.
schools are going to want to give them a lot of money because that's going to be a lot of revenue. If someone who is famous on Instagram or TikTok comes to your school, there's a better chance you're going to sell more tickets because more people want to come see that person play. So they can give them more money. And I think that unless there's some kind of, cap per person or per player put on this, it could be really good for those who have a lot of influence, but for people that are still putting in hard work and who are still doing their best on the field, may not be necessarily beneficial for them just because they don't have an Instagram account or a TikTok account.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it's not sustainable either.
yeah,
Like this current model is not, colleges and universities are going to go bankrupt trying to sustain this current level of income. They're already talking about bringing in, venture capital firms to back some of these athletics departments and all kinds of crazy stuff to raise the funds necessary. One of the other major aspects of this executive order that was signed by President Trump is protecting non-revenue generating sports and women's sports. You have schools that are going to, buy into this $20.5 million a year that's expected to increase, by 1% over the next 10 years. There are schools actively evaluating certain non-revenue generating sports because they don't have the funds to support them anymore, because they want to support their, football or men's basketball programs. The next question becomes then, with the $20.5 million, schools are not evenly allocating that to
no.
across sports. It's football and men's basketball are receiving 70% of it, and the other sports then sharing 30%. Or less in
Now, are
certain
they doing
so
that on like a revenue proportion basis? Like if football brings in
yeah, I think
30%, they give
yeah,
30% to football? Okay.
that's or they're projecting where where their opportunities to make the most money are from a revenue perspective, and they're allocating it that way, which are usually men's basketball and football. But then does that leave behind Olympic sports? And the concern there is that, like, we have a U.S. Olympic program that we strive to be the best in the world, and if these NCAA programs are dropping like flies, and what does our U.S. Olympic development program look like? Because the NCAA is a direct pipeline for those sports to the Olympics, and on an international level. Even just to bring like international politics into the conversation, there are a lot of people in the federal government who see that as a real concern. So there are a lot of eyes on this issue, and I think that we're going to see in due time what happens there. But I think that the executive order that was signed by President Trump, there's a whole section on women's sports and Olympic sports in there for
Yeah.
that very reason, and the importance of allocating revenue sharing money in an equal proportion to ensure that those programs and scholarships for those student athletes are ultimately protected and not left behind.
So the reason that they're considering cutting those programs is because they currently offer scholarships. And if they can't offer the scholarships because they're sending money via revenue sharing, they're not going to
Yeah,
be
it's a
able
money
to.
resource issue. So
Yeah.
schools are having to make difficult decisions in some cases, whether or not they can fund those other non-revenue generating sports, including their scholarships. And the other part of the House settlement that sort of tossed the NCAA tossed it upside down was that it eliminates the scholarship roster limit. So, you have a football program of 100 some players. There used to be a cap on the number of scholarships that you could offer. I think it was 80. There's no longer a scholarship cap.
So now they can give everyone scholarships and money to play and NIL deals.
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah.
But now there's a maximum roster size. There are new roster sizes that they have to comply with.
Okay.
But the concern is that takes money away from non-revenue generating sports, obviously. So
absolutely.
Yep, to fund those activities.
So it's not even it's not even going to college, getting an education, and excelling at the next level. It's going to become even more so like high school is going to be the next level. And if you don't make it to a sport that is a revenue generating sport, are you going to be able to play in college is the question.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where it's headed right now.
Yep. That is exactly where it's headed. And there's some concerns that will walk-ons exist anymore if everyone is scholarshiped? You're going to take a roster spot away from, the guy, that's busting his tail to walk on and make a roster. And those are some of the most inspiring stories in sports that, we all love to see. You're wearing a Notre Dame sweatshirt today. Does Rudy exist in today's world? I think the clear and obvious answer to that is no.
No.
And that's really what NCAA sports were supposed to be all about. So we very quickly went from, amateur college sports to, let's just call it what it is, professional sports.
Yeah.
In a matter of 5 years, we went from amateur NCAA sports to professional NCAA athletes with endorsement deals, salaries, salary caps. In 5 years. It's crazy.
Cause I like NIL, right? What provoked, what do you think was the main source of provoking that colleges now need to pay the players?
The video game, college football, NCAA video game was the start of all this.
Really?
And that was the first case that was brought against the NCAA, where EA Sports is making millions of dollars a year on NCAA football, and a class of college football players brought a lawsuit against the NCAA, and that's what started this whole NIL storm, because they were not being paid for their NIL being licensed and used for that game. So that's what started all of this, believe it or not, the EA Sports NCAA football game.
Yeah, they're sitting there playing in their dorm room, and they're like, that's me.
I should be getting paid for this.
Why am I not getting paid?
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Because didn't they stop
jersey sales
it?
Is the other spot. Then they had to stop producing it.
Yeah.
And then jersey sales was the other major driver of this. People walking around. Johnny Manziel says all the time. He's like, I sold more jerseys in College Station, Texas than I think any player in Texas college football history. I'd have made millions of dollars on that if I would have been compensated with that. And in that program, they put the last name on the jersey. Yeah. So people were walking around legitimately wearing Johnny Manziel jerseys.
Yeah.
And he didn't make a dime off of that.
Yeah. It wasn't like just a number 2. It was
right.
Manziel.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that things like that I do. So is that supposedly where the revenues are coming from, though? Things like that? That's where they're supposed to come from, or it doesn't matter at all? It can be from anything.
It can be from any source.
Okay.
Up to the $20.5 million cap, but they're using the money that the revenue that's generated from their athletics departments.
Yeah.
Ticket sales, concessions, those are their biggest sources of income. Advertising, other major source of income. So for a program like, Penn State that's, you know, making $130 million a year,
Yeah,
it's pretty easy to fund that $20.5 million. But,
absolutely.
for a school like, any of these smaller schools, it's like St. Francis out in Altoona, PA. St. Francis dropped from FCS down to D3 because they're like, we cannot afford to buy into this, and we won't be competitive, if we don't. So they dropped down to D3 to not have to buy into that into the revenue sharing cap to try to save the future of their athletics departments. So schools are making tough decisions right now that are in that boat.
Absolutely. And that can change the course of one of their players' futures, right? Because now there's D3 or whoever comes to the school in general. There's a lot going on right now with NIL deals. And I really appreciate you bringing up a lot of stuff and a lot of things. I really think my viewers are they're really going to find this interesting. If you have like one thing that you think people should be on the lookout in the future with NIL deals, what would it be?
I think I am going to be very interested over the next year to see where we go from this executive order that was issued by President Trump in July, at the end of July. And if that ultimately ends up transpiring in federal legislation or additional guidance, and how that is going to change the next 5 to 10 years in college sports. I'm keeping a tight eye on that. I know there are other people in Washington D.C. that are keeping a really tight eye on it as well, because that's going to determine where we go from here and whether or not the process is more formalized, or if we continue with this wild, wild west crap where you got NIL collectives inducing people to jump into transfer portals, and you have college football coaches that, can't adequately, prepare or plan ahead with any type of, predictions because they have kids on their roster that just jump. I think Coach Franklin at Penn State did an interview not that long ago where he was discussing this scenario where he was accidentally CC'd on an email that he wasn't supposed to get between a sports agent representing one of his athletes and another third-party NIL collective. Or no, between a sports agent and his athlete that he represents. Coach Franklin was accidentally CC'd on it. And the agent is asking the student if he's interested in X, Y, or Z school, who has X number of dollars waiting for him if he's in the transfer portal. And Coach Franklin sees that and he's like, well, the problem with this scenario is that athlete isn't in the transfer portal, and you just now unlawfully tried to induce one of these guys on my roster to transfer.
Yeah.
There's
Because then
stuff.
doesn't
Yeah.
the agent get paid then if the player gets paid?
Well, he's getting a commission. Yeah.
Yeah. So now
The
there's
agents are
yeah.
getting a commission on, so there's a direct financial incentive for them to make deals because they're getting anywhere between a 5 and a 10% cut on the ultimate NIL agreement that's signed. So it's interesting, and I will be following tightly to see if this executive order goes anywhere, if there's teeth to it, if it ends up bringing federal legislation, or if it doesn't, and it doesn't go anywhere, and we continue this informal process. You're going to see more litigation. So it's interesting stuff nonetheless, but that's what I'm keeping my eyes on for the future.
Awesome, man. For those of you listening, Phil does have a hard stop today. He actually has a lecture that he's going out to do in Pittsburgh. tonight, and really appreciate you taking the time, man, to sit down and talk with us. I know my viewers appreciated it. I appreciated it very much.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, I wish we could have gone, for another 2 hours.
Yeah.
There's so much to unpack here. But maybe we'll have to just reserve that for the future, and we can come back and discuss it again.
Yeah, whenever this starts to unfold, in the media and in the space, the NIL space and the college football NCAA space, I would really like to have you back on, because I know a lot of people, they're watching this right now because it's a hot topic. So as those things happen, it'd be great to get your perspective on it, because you're very behind the scenes with like the legal things that are going on with it. I feel like a lot of people need that explanation.
Absolutely. We'll be happy to do it anytime, Joe.
Awesome, Phil. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time, man. And for all you out there listening, we are on Spotify, post clips on Instagram, and I'm also on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Phil, thank you for your time today. Again, I really, really appreciate it. And for all you out there listening, stay blessed.